That Tuesday, Raphael arrived earlier than expected. A meeting in Monterey was cancelled at the last minute, and on a whim, he decided not to tell anyone about his arrival. Return. The driver left in front of the main gate, and he crossed the hall, taking off the sack, still arguing on the phone with his director financial. He was upset about a poorly written email, for a bad business, for the fact that the world didn't work the way he did. I was waiting. As I turned towards the corridor that connected with the service wing, stopped dry. There, in half of the marble polished, there was a child. He would not have been more than 5 years old, with brown skin and hair dark and a determined expression, as if he were in his own house. He played with a plastic stroller, oblivious to its surroundings. But it was when raised the sight that something in Raphael froze. The eyes of the child, dark and intense, were a mirror of the yours, and that split eyebrow, identical to the scar I had since the 7 years. The first Raphael's reaction was to flee. He locked himself in his studio, closed the door with insurance and support back against the wood, as if escaping from a fire. For minutes, he did nothing but breathe, stare into spaces and sweat. He wanted to think it was a joke, that maybe some friend was playing a trick, though I knew that was ridiculous. Nobody I could invent those eyes, that eyebrow, that look. His mind traveled then to a memory distant, one that he had preferred to bury. One night, more than 5 years ago, after a dinner with partners, when it had been had too many drinks and returned home alone. Lupita was there. They had crossed paths the kitchen. They didn't speak much. Everything was fast, confusing, almost unreal. I never mentioned. She didn't either. And the next day, each one followed with your life as if nothing had happened. But now that nothing had name, face, and what? He called Dad. If this part touched you, subscribe to the channel. Sometimes a story can open the eyes on someone else. That afternoon, Raphael did something he didn't usually do. Was he who went down to the service area. He walked with firm step, although inside I felt like I was stepping glass. He touched the door of the Lupita's room. She took a long time to open. Seeing him, his face changed, but said nothing. He just walked in and closed the door, and stood there staring at her. "Is it mine?" she asked, her voice dry. Lupita loathed the look. His silence was more eloquent than any word. "Why didn't you tell me anything?" Raphael insisted, this time with a tone more hurt than annoyed. "Lupita," he swallowed. "Because I didn't have sense. You would have wanted, and I wasn't going to beg anyone to love their own son." Those words, they were like a dagger. Raphael felt smaller than ever. He had committed many errors in his life, but that I was 5 years old, a plastic stroller and the same split eyebrow than he. That night, without consulting with nobody, Raphael sent take a DNA test, did secretly, through his personal physician, with a hair sample that he same took from Tonito's comb. I didn't want doubts. I didn't want ambiguities. He needed a certainty that his heart already. He screamed, but his mind still refused to accept. While I expected the results, he spent hours watching the child from a distance. I saw running through the garden, talk with the gardeners, singing made-up songs out loud. He was charismatic, curious, and lively, and his every gesture was like seeing himself in a 5-year-old mirror. The wait was over a week later. The envelope with the results were upon his desk. Raphael didn't need open it to find out what it said. Even so, it did. And when reading the scientific confirmation, cried for the first time in decades. Tonito was his, and he had lost 5 years of his life without know it. With the result in hand, Raphael thought that everything would be easier, that by having the true could simply approach, hug her son, and start a new history. But the reality was different. When tried approach Tonito in his garden, the child was cautious, looked with those themselves intense eyes, but he didn't run toward. He didn't smile. He stood still, as if waiting for an explanation. Raphael crouched down to his level, trying to look less imposing. "Hi, Tonito," "Can I play with you?" he asked, feeling awkward. The boy. He hesitated for a few seconds before handing it over a blue stroller. It was a small gesture, but for Raphael it was like receiving a trophy. From that moment on, he began to look for any excuse to share time with him. He read stories in the nights, bought books, even tried make him cereal, even though he didn't have any idea of how. Little by little, Tonito began to open, cautiously, with pauses, but it toward. However, not everyone was oblivious to change. Vanessa, with his sharp radar, noticed his behavior, Raphael's strange, his absences, his silences, the soft smiles that started he child. One afternoon, watching them play from the window of his fourth, something in she clicked. It went down with the excuse to speak with Lupita, but it was straight to the point. "What does that child hear so often? Why does my husband treat him like he's yours?" he asked, with the voice sharp as a dagger. Lupita didn't respond, but that silence was all Vanessa needed to set off alarm bells. In less than 24 hours, she contacted Arturo, the lawyer of the family, and ordered an investigation into everything. He agreed to the Raphael's private papers, found the DNA test, read every word, and then the rage transformed. Not only did it feel betrayed, she felt humiliated, and that was something I never, ever thought about. Forgive. Vanessa didn't do it a scandal immediate. It wasn't his style. He preferred the silent wars, those that were won with strategy and calculated cruelty. First thing he did was to say goodbye to Lupita without prior notice. He gave him a letter signed by the lawyers, with cold and legal arguments, accusing her of conduct improper and concealment of relevant information. Lupita didn't cry. She just asked to see Raphael, but they denied the entrance. That same afternoon, while Tonito was sleeping the siesta, a driver he took with his things to a pension in the outskirts. When he woke up, his mother was no longer there. He asked for her, insisted, cried. Raphael, bewildered by the speed of everything, tried to ask for explanations, but Vanessa was already there, was activated. His second move, a custody suit, accusing Lupita of having intentionally hidden the child and of living in inadequate conditions. In addition, he leaked a false document to the press, insinuating that Lupita was blackmailed Raphael for years. The news exploded like gunpowder. The illegitimate heir of the Santillan Empire, they said the headlines. Social media was filled with comments, memes, and speculation. Some it attacked, others it defended, but everyone was talking about him. The board of directors of his company it called an urgent meeting. They wanted answers. They wanted me to give the face, or on the contrary, it would remove of the position. His trusted lawyer, Arturo, the same one who had been Vanessa's accomplice, was distant. "We need contain he damage," he said. Raphael understood then. I was alone, more alone than ever. And worst of all, Tonito was no longer there at home. Vanessa had sent to live with an aunt distant until everything was resolved. That night, Raphael did not return to his room. He locked himself in her room, Lupita's void, where still were left some drawings of the child taped to the wall. He sat down in the ground and for the first time understood what it was like to have real fear. Fear of losing the only thing you will never lose knew he had. The scandal was not long in coming into Nick in his empire. Various partners began to withdraw from joint projects. International brands, they froze investment agreements, and what was still worse, his image, carefully built over decades, was crumbling by leaps and bounds. The magazines that had once they praised, now it ridiculed. The television channels showed images of Tonito pixelated, with dramatic narratives about a child hidden in the shadows of power. Raphael didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he just thought, and the more he did, the more he became convinced that he could not continue living under that ceiling, neither a one more day. He decided to give up everything. He announced his retirement from the presidency of the Santillan Group in a press conference without luxuries. With a wrinkled shirt and the red eyes, He didn't accept questions. He just said, "There are more important things than the money, and I'm going to fight for them." That same afternoon, he showed up in the boarding house where Lupita was staying. Tonito opened the door. Seeing it, first hesitated, then ran to hug him with force. Raphael bent down and held as if he were out life in. "I promise I won't leave again," he said. He whispered in my ear. Then he spoke with Lupita. He asked her sorry, not only for him past, but for having allowed everything to happen so far away. She doesn't hugged him. Not him insulted him. He just heard, "I don't know if I believe you, Raphael, but for him, for Tonito, we're going to try to do things are going well," he said. Thus began a new stage. Raphael rented a small apartment in a modest area, away from the luxuries he knew. He moved with Lupita and Tonito. They shared a bath. They cooked together and carried the child, walking to a new public school. People were murmuring. Some they looked with contempt, others with curiosity. But for the first time in his life, Raphael did not feel empty. Life in that small apartment was not easy. Raphael did not know how to handle the school hours, nor as fold clothes, nor how to prepare a decent breakfast. But I learned, sometimes burned tortillas, others times confused Tonito's uniform with the physical education one. However, the child laughed, and Lupita, although she didn't, I said, I started to look at him differently. In the nights, Raphael counted stories to Tonito invented, stories about dragons that lived in tall buildings and gentlemen wearing suits and ties. The boy I listened with attention, sometimes correcting it, sometimes falling asleep in his arms. It was in those moments, with the dim light and the silence in the background, when Raphael understood that he didn't need more than that the love he didn't give for 5 years still could to be built, day by day, word by word. But outside those walls, the storm continued. Vanessa refused. The defeat. He ordered the closure of the school where I studied Tonito for alleged irregularities. He spread rumors that Raphael had crazy and that Lupita it manipulated. In addition, he initiated a legal process to obtain full custody of the child, claiming that Raphael was not in mental condition nor economical to offer you a suitable environment. Given that new attack, Raphael did not break. He looked for help, found a veteran lawyer named Don Ezekiel, retired but with a reputation for being honest and ruthless. At first, man hesitated. He has the face of one of those who buy justice, he said, but after meeting Tonito and seeing how it hugged upon arrival of the college, accepted the case. I'll help you, but only if you fight with the true. No tricks. Raphael nodded. For the first time, he had a cause to which fight that was not a business nor a contract. It was his son. Don Ezekiel prepared a counterclaim for defamation, abuse of power, and media manipulation. He gathered statements from former employees, screenshots of conversations leaked by the same domestic staff of the mansion, and even a statement from a teacher confirming that Tonito was a happy child since he lived with his father. Meanwhile, Raphael became a different man. He stood up early to take your son to school, cooked rice with tuna when there was not enough money, and he learned to mend socks with needle and thread. Sometimes I went out to look for work, but his last name still was too heavy. Many it rejected for fear of scandal. Others simply it were unaware. It was Lupita who found a temporary employment as a cook in an inn. Raphael, without say it, the eye admired her more every day. That woman who had despised in his world of luxury was now he anchor that it held. Meanwhile, Vanessa clung to an increasingly fragile version of control. Arturo, her trusted lawyer, began to doubt. He had seen how she manipulated, lied, and destroyed without mercy. At first, it was said that it was just work, but with the time, the discomfort became repulsion. One night, Arturo visited Don Ezekiel unannounced. "I need clean my hands. She used me," he confessed. He handed over documents, emails, and recordings that proved Vanessa had paid. Journalists and manipulated testimonies. Ezekiel looked without blink. "If what you give me is real, This changes everything. To the few days presented the evidence before him judge, the scales began to lean over. Raphael, for the first time in weeks, slept peacefully, not because of the legal victory, but because Tonito, before closing the eyes, him there was said, "Dad, I don't have any more fear." The custody trial became in a media event. The cameras, they were waiting for the exit of the court. The newscasts, they debated live. And social networks were a battlefield between those who they defended Vanessa as a victim betrayed and who supported the Raphael's transformation. Lupita remained silently attending each hearing with the head high, without scandals nor dramatic gestures. When was called to testify, spoke calmly. He said the complete truth, from the evening in which Raphael arrived drunk, up to the years raising Tonito alone, working without rest, so that nothing would be lacking. I never wanted his money. I just wanted you to know that I had a son and that he loved him if he wanted to do it. That was all. His testimony moved many. Even the judge, the looked with, "I respect." Vanessa, on the other hand, tried keep his composure. He declared with a firm voice, but each word sounded empty. He claimed that it had all been a plan to ruin your marriage and your reputation. He showed altered documents, but they were quickly denied by the Arturos. Trials. Her image as a powerful and elegant woman began to crack. The press that had once praised now doubted his version. Even some friends in the business circle stopped responding to him. Calls. As the case progressed, his surroundings became colder, more distant. In one of the last hearings, seeing Tonito hugging Raphael at the end of the room, Vanessa felt something she had not felt in a lot. Time. Loneliness. Not anger. Not revenge. Pure loneliness. And that they became enraged even more. Because in his mind, it was all their fault, Lupita's, Raphael's, and that one child who never should have existed. When judgment reached its final stage, the judge asked, "Listen to Tonito." It was a controversial decision, but he argued that the child had right to express how it felt. Raphael and Lupita, they hesitated, but Tonito accepted. He entered the room with his favorite shirt, a green dinosaur one, and walked with steps small but determined. The judge, "You speak." Gently, he asked if I knew why I was there. Tonito nodded. "Because they don't want me to live with my mom and dad." Everyone was silent. "And you? With who want live?" he asked judge. "With both of them," he replied, without hesitation. Then he added, "But I don't want to go back to that big house. There nobody plays, nobody laughs. There is only closed doors." His voice did not tremble. Raphael felt as his heart is compressed and saw Lupita wipe a tear with dissimulation. Have you ever experienced something like this? Tell us about it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to continue following stories that heal. Tonito's statement was his breaking point. The judge granted joint custody to Raphael and Lupita, with main residence in a maternal home. Vanessa was legally restricted from having contact with the minor until further notice, and an investigation was opened for abuse of power and tampering with evidence. Raphael, although relieved, did not celebrate. There was no winners in that room, only decisions difficult. To the exit of the judge, took Lupita's hand in silence. "She doesn't." He let go. The journalists surrounded the car. They shouted questions, took photos, tried to provoke some reaction. Raphael didn't respond. He got into the car with his son in arms and left behind the building, the cameras and noise. "I didn't have idea of how I would be here tomorrow, but for the first time in his life, was willing to build it from scratch, with errors, with effort, but also with love." Life after of the trial was not magical nor perfect. The problems didn't magically disappear. Raphael continued without employment stable, and although had some savings, he knew they wouldn't last forever. He began offering discreet advice to small businesses, helping them avoid the mistakes that he same committed when I thought everything was resolved with money. Some they listened with interest. Others it rejected with distrust. Sometimes he left frustrated, feeling that his last name, it was still a stain. But every time I came home and found Tonito waiting for him with a drawing new or a silly question, everything made sense. It was as if every "Dad, look at this" erased a part of the old version of yes, the same one that he despised so much. Lupita, for her part, became in her silent partner. She managed the few income of the home with precision surgical, cooked economical, recipes with a taste of home, and was beginning to recover that energy that had been buried under years of silence forced. Sometimes they argued. He still had outbursts of control, of impatience. She faced without fear, with the firmness of whom no longer accepts being invisible. But also, they laughed. They shared simple moments, like washing the dishes while they sang silly songs or watching movies with subtitles because Tonito wanted to read like the grown-ups. Raphael discovered that happiness was not there in the yachts, neither in the tailor-made suits. I was in Sundays with bread sweet, in the hugs before sleeping, seeing your son run without fear for him hallway of a narrow but lively apartment. One day, while they picked up Tonito of the at school, a mother approached Raphael. "Are you the Antonio's dad?" he asked, with a smile kind. He nodded, a little defensively. "I just wanted to tell him that his son is a sweetheart. My daughter talk about him all the time. He says it protects her from the annoying children." Raphael thanked with a shy gesture. When the woman walked away, she felt something strange, pride. Not the kind you write in magazines, but of the kind that feels in the chest when you know what you're doing it correct. Although no one else he looked at Tonito, who was leaving in a hurry with the backpack poorly closed and the untied shoes, and thought, "That child is my greatest achievement." But Vanessa's shadow had not yet completely vanished. From her isolation, continued pulling strings. He had appealed the judicial decision, although his public image was destroyed. Some means that previously were faithful, now they were unaware, while others, they published sensationalist notes about his fall. In the private, however, his rage continued growing. He tried to contact Tonito in several occasions, sending him gifts, letters, and even a leaked video call through an ex-Raphael's employee. The child didn't respond to anything. When Raphael found out, he reinforced the home security, changed her number, and hired Don Ezekiel himself to initiate a stricter restraining order. Not out of revenge, but for protection. "She doesn't understand that this isn't about her, it's about him," he told her. He told the lawyer, "And this time, I won't fail." Following months, they brought something Raphael hadn't expected. Calm, not absolute, not without challenges, but yes, stable enough to breathe without shocks. Tonito began to stand out in his school. He liked the mathematics, although he said he preferred the breaks. He became friends with a child called Emmy, and together they invented games that required more imagination than toys. Raphael attended parent-teacher conferences, at first feeling like a strange, until one day was elected to the school committee. He laughed when it is. They said, "I, who didn't know nor prepare a lunchbox. Now I choose the color of the tablecloths of the kermesse." Lupita also began to recover some of his independence. With money they saved, bought a mixer new, and started selling cakes homemade. In a short time, I had regular customers and a social media page with more followers than Raphael, but that calm did not mean forgetting. Raphael still thought in the lost years, in the childhood that he did not share, in the first words that he did not hear, in the falls that didn't heal. Sometimes he woke up with that anguish. Other times, he would simply sit and look at photos he had started printing, putting together albums from scratch. In one of them, Tonito Sale hugged her waist, with the face stained with chocolate. "This is the first photo I have with you," he said he chilled when they hit in the cardboard. Raphael looked unable to speak. I felt that although he path there was started late, still there was time, not to erase what was ent, but to build what was coming. And every day was an opportunity new. One more way to say, I love you without words, of healing with gestures, with acts, of being finally a present father. One Saturday afternoon, while Raphael was sweeping a balcony, Tonito is approached with a box in hands. "What you bring there?" he asked, curious. "A treasure," he replied, child. When he opened it, he found drawings, plastic figures, a stone heart shaped, and a letter written in childlike handwriting. Raphael read silently. "Thank you for being my dad. Although you arrived late, you stayed." He couldn't stop, the eyes will fill with tears. Tonito. It looked without fully understanding the effect of his words. "Are you okay?" he asked. Raphael nodded, hugged with strength, and replied, "I am better than ever." That moment sealed something between them, a complicity that could no longer be broken with the noise of the outside world. Because beyond of the scandal, of the money, and of the wrong decisions, there, where a royal family was born, imperfect, yes, but true. With her time, Raphael was rebuilding also its links with others. Some friends of the past they approached again, this time with respect, not with flattery. One of them, an architect called Damien, proposed a project, create housing accessible to single mothers. "You know how to move contacts. I have the experience. Lupita can contribute from the kitchen community." Raphael accepted without doubt, not for business, but out of conviction. There was understood that his power was not in the millions that he had lost, but in the story that there was cattle, and that history now, it served to open roads. While they worked in the plans, Lupita looked at Raphael with different eyes. "I no longer eat the man who had ignored, nor as the desperate father, looked like a companion, someone who, finally, walked beside him, not in front of him, nor behind, and that, in his world, was a revolution." The housing project took shape faster than expected. With the help of Don Ezekiel, they managed permits, legal and sponsorships of small foundations. Raphael discovered a new passion. Speaking in communities, listened stories of women who, like Lupita, had raised their children alone in silence and strength. Each testimony He remembered everything he had ignored for years. And in every workshop, in every visit, Tonito was present, handing out flyers or simply running between the hallways, dusty of the constructions. Sometimes Raphael does it. I watched from afar and thought in as a child so little there was collapsed an empire, and at the same time built something much stronger. Because now I knew, love is not imposed, it is earned. And Tonito, just by existing, there was won everything. Vanessa, meanwhile, faced a very different fate. The complaints they advanced against him, and although counted with resources to defend themselves, their name had lost power. The brands avoided their accounts. On social media, they were filled with negative comments, and their social life was extinguished. In a last-ditch attempt to regain some control, he offered a public apology from a digital medium. It was brief, rehearsed, without emotion. "I'm sorry for the mistakes made," he said. "Nobody you believed, not even she." In private, Arturo told her asked to withdraw from the legal proceedings against Raphael and Tonito. "Now you've done enough damage. You gain nothing by continuing," he said. Vanessa fired without answering. She was left alone in a penthouse that was once a symbol of triumph and now only remembered what he had lost, not the money nor fame, but the possibility of having been something more than a mask. One Sunday, at a local fair, Tonito stopped in front of a stand selling personalized wooden frames. "Can we make one for our photo?" he asked. Raphael smiled. They chose one together with blue details, and the child wrote with a black marker, "My dad, my mom and I." When they returned home, they hung up the photo on the sofa like a simple but profound symbol. That painting became in the center of the home. Every new visit it noticed. Some it praised. Others, they remained uncomfortably silent. But no one could deny the truth that showed. 3 people who chose rebuild in half from chaos. Raphael, once the country's most feared tycoon, was now thrilled seeing his son sleeping, celebrated with applause when Lupita sold 2 more cakes and argued with passion the color of new curtains. He had lost his throne, but he had found a home, and that was more than I had ever had imagined. With he passed of the Raphael began to write, not out of ambition, but as a way of understanding everything he had experienced. At first, they were loose notes, reflections on napkins, phrases that they came while I was waiting for Tonito at the exit of the school. Then, with the support of Lupita, the organized Don Ezekiel read one of the drafts and he said, "This is not just a testimony, it is a warning and also a hope." Thus was born the idea of publishing a book, not with a big publisher, but in an independent with modest print run. The title was simple, Dad, Although You Arrived Late. In the presentation, there was no lights, neither cameras, only one community room full of women, single parents, confused young people. Raphael spoke with a calm voice, without drama, and finished with a phrase that moved everyone. There is no redemption without action. I didn't ask to be a father, but now I wouldn't know live without be it. The book had an unexpected echo. Alternative media reviewed, radio programs invited to speak, people from different cities. They began to write to him. Some told their stories, others simply, they thanked him for saying out loud what many were silent. Raphael was not seeking fame, but he understood that if his experience could serving someone else was worth sharing. In one of those interviews, they asked if it was still considered millionaire. He thought for a second and replied, "Now, yes, but not for what I have, but for what I found." That response went viral. Invited to conferences, to give talks in schools, including collaborating in parenting programs responsible. And every time he spoke, toward with the broken voice, with honesty, without hiding his guilt. Because he had learned that the real change does not begin when everything is fine, but when you decide not to repeat the damage. Lupita. I watched all that process with a mixture of pride and caution. He was pleased to see how Raphael had transformed, how he was approaching the others without arrogance, how I listened without interrupt, but also I knew that the past is not erased with good intentions. There were wounds that did not close easily. Sometimes, when I went out to give a talk or receive messages of admiration, she was left alone in the kitchen, looking out the window, wondering if a day would wake up and everything would be back to normal. However, Raphael never gave cause for doubt. Every night I was coming home, asked as you had gone, he helped mix flour or to clean the table. And when they sat down the 3 for dinner, I saw in the Tonito's eyes a calm that never there was known. That it was enough. One day, Tonito arrived with a school assignment to do a family tree. They sat down the 3 in the table with scissors, old photos and colored pencils. Raphael, who had never made one in his life, he was more excited than the child. They looked for photos of the grandparents, drew arrows, invented a special branch to include Don Ezekiel as uncle of the heart. When they finished, Tonito wrote in big letters, "My family is not perfect, but it is mine." Raphael said it hug without say anything. I felt that tree not only represented names or dates, but all of them decisions that they had brought up to there. Every branch was a second chance, every leaf a promise. And in the center, there was no imposing surname nor a shield of power, but a child with a shy smile and a phrase that everything had changed. Dad. The school where I studied Tonito organized a ceremony for the day of the family. Raphael wasn't sure he wanted to attend. He was afraid of being judged, watched, reduced to the father of the scandal. But it was Tonito who had convinced. It doesn't matter whatever they say. Dad, you come with me, okay? So he put on the least wrinkled shirt he found. He bought a flower and he walked, and arrived at school with his heart beating like a drum. Upon entering the room, some they looked with curiosity, others with respect, none with mockery. When they called Tonito to the front to talk about his family, the child took a microphone without fear. I Used to live in a very big house, but I felt small. Now I live in a smaller house, but my heart feels big because I have my mom and my dad." There was applause, and tears too. After the act, a mother approached Raphael. "I want you to know that you gave me hope. My husband left us does years, and see what it did for his son. Reminds me that there is men good there outside." Raphael didn't know that say. He just smiled, and inside he was grateful, silently having taken the difficult path, because that way, although full of stones, it there was taken straight to the true. That night, already at home, Tonito drawing the ceremony in his notebook, he drew himself standing, talking with a microphone, and next to him, Raphael with the flower in the hand. "Do I look well?" he asked. "You look like a hero," Raphael replied. "And you?" he insisted. He chilled. Raphael thought for a few seconds. "I see myself as a dad who has a lot luck." With he as the months go by, the routine of small apartment became a choreography good rehearsed. Raphael prepared breakfast while Tonito was washing himself the teeth humming invented songs. Lupita reviewed the cake orders and wrote them down, the missing ingredients, in a notebook attached to the refrigerator. Sometimes they argued over nonsense, over whom I had forgotten to turn off the light bath for the rice that was left very salty, by the Tonito's shoes always out of place, but they were discussions with a happy ending, which ended in hugs or laughter. They even started saving up to change the furniture, old ones for more comfortable ones. "Not for luxury," Raphael said, "but because we deserve to live beautifully, even with little." Happiness didn't come wrapped in gold paper, but in simple gestures, like sharing a glass of milk warm or watch together same movie for the 5th time. One night, while they watched a soft rain fall through the window, Raphael took Lupita's hand. There was no words, just that gesture. She didn't retire. They stayed, so a long time, in silence, listening as Tonito, I was sleeping in the next room. "I never thought we'd be here like this," he said finally. "Me neither," he replied without looking towards other side. "And is it okay?" Raphael asked. Lupita nodded, and for the first time, supported the head in his shoulder. It was not an official reconciliation, nor a promise of eternal love, but it was a beginning, a new one, more honest, more real. At that moment, Raphael understood that true things are not announced. They are simply occur when you stop running away and decide to stay. Up to date, next, Tonito woke up earlier than usual. He entered the kitchen with a huge smile and a folded piece of paper in the hand. "I did something in class I want teach them," he said, while placed the sheet of paper on the table. It was an essay titled, "The Person I Admire Most." Raphael and Lupita looked at each other, curious. The boy, he had written, "I admire my dad because he used to be a sir. Seriously, I didn't know make rice. Now she makes delicious rice. She reads to me stories and hugs me when I have fear. I also admire my mum because she never tires and always listens to me. But what I admire most is that, although they fight sometimes, they never stop being together." Raphael had to get up to keep from crying. There same. He went into the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and for the first time he didn't see the fallen businessman, nor the abandoned husband. He saw a father, and that it made me feel strong. That same day, while they walked together along the neighborhood, a young people are approached shyly. "Excuse me, are you of the book?" he asked Raphael. He nodded, somewhat surprised. "My mom made me read it. I didn't want to at first, but thank you. It helped me understand things about my dad I never knew. Forgive." He gave him hand and left. Raphael stood still for a few seconds, as if the wind you would have given a soft slap. Lupita, who had heard, he said, "You are doing more than you think." Without give you, Raphael tells her. He looked and thought that maybe, just maybe, life was giving a second chance, not only with his son, but with himself. Because it was not just about redeeming himself before the others, but to be able to look in the mirror and not look down. With the arrival of the new school year, Tonito was promoted to a higher rank. In the ceremony, the teachers, they highlighted several students. And to Rafael and Lupita's surprise, their son was recognized for his adaptability and camaraderie. Tonito. He went up to the stage nervous, but smiling. He thanked his teachers and at the end said, "I also want to thank my parents, who taught me that the important thing is not having a big house, but having a family that listens to you." The audience, he applauded, and Rafael, sitting between the parents, felt that that moment was worth more than any business award that had once been received. He looked at Lupita, and, without to say nothing, he interlaced his fingers with hers. It was a simple gesture, but for both, it meant a silent pact. We were broken, but together, we can be whole. The community of the neighborhood also began to look at the family with others' eyes. They were no longer just the ex-millionaire, the employee, and the child of the scandal. They were Rafael, Lupita, and Tonito, the neighbors that they greeted with familiarity, the children they invited Tonito to play, and they even began to receive invitations to shared meals. One afternoon, during a meeting community, a woman elderly them, he said, "You taught us that always there is time to start over, that no one is condemned for their mistakes if they choose to change." Rafael thanked with a smile, while Lupita, he was holding a tray with bread homemade, then her same there was baked. In that communal kitchen, between laughter and dishes simple, Rafael understood that his new place in the world did not have marbles, no candlesticks, but yes, had a purpose. And that the respect, when is born of love and true, it is worth more than any fortune. One weekend, they decided do their first family trip. They didn't have a lot of money, so they chose a town nearby with a river and a playground. They rented a cabin, simple. They packed sandwiches, and they brought an old ball that Tonito Vry adored. During the road, they sang off-key songs, got lost once, and argued over whether they had brought enough mosquito repellent. But when they arrived, the sun was perfect, the river clean, and the air smelled of freedom. Tonito ran non-stop for hours. He splashed around in the water, armed stone castles, and fell twice without cry. Rafael and Lupita, they looked from a spread blanket in the grass. They didn't speak much. It was not necessary, because in that shared silence had more understanding than in 1,000 conversations. For the night, already inside the cabin, Tonito fell asleep before finishing his juice. Rafael arrangement carefully. He kissed forehead and then sat next to Lupita in a porch. The sky was full of stars, and for the first time in a lot time, the silence was not heavy. "Do you think this will last?" he asked. He replied, "I don't know," she, sincere, "but if tomorrow we are like this, it will be worth it." Rafael took a breath, felt that those words are given to him, they recorded in the chest. "I didn't need guarantees, only the present, only that moment, that night, that respite, because sometimes wounds do not close completely, but they stop hurting. And sometimes, when you learn to live with scars, you discover that they are part of what makes you strong. At that moment, Rafael realized. Account was no longer there, fleeing of the past. I was building the future. Upon returning from the trip, Rafael decided to do something he had put off for months. Visit his mother's grave. He didn't. There was made since it all began scandal. Perhaps out of shame, perhaps out of fear of facing his own ghosts, he went alone, without tell anyone. She carried simple flowers, knelt down, and spoke as if she could listen to it. "You had reason, Mom. I thought that I knew everything, that the world was mine, and in the end, I didn't know neither who he was." He told her about Tonito, about Lupita, about the new life he was trying to build, and in the end, he made a promise. "I will be the father that you wanted me had, not perfect, but present." Upon leaving of the cemetery, the air seemed lighter, as if by releasing words to the wind, they also would have released some of the weight that tied. That night, Rafael told Lupita where She had been. I'm listening silently, with a mixture of surprise and tenderness. And how did you feel? He asked. Liberated, he replied. As if finally would have closed a cycle. Lupita, he nodded. Closing cycles hurts, but it hurts more to stay trapped in them. Since that conversation, they started talking more about their personal history, of their childhoods, of what the there was made who were. Not everything was painful. There was also laughter, memories good, anecdotes that they shared with Tonito, who always asked unexpected questions like, "Do you were, boy, dad?" Those simple but profound moments wove an intimacy new between them. It wasn't the soap opera love Raphael had once imagined. It was a real one, woven from trust, time, and decisions daily, and that, for him, was more than enough. One afternoon, while we're returning from the market, they crossed with a Raphael's former partner. The man it looked with a mixture of surprise and compassion. "I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you had left the country." Raphael smiled. "I was more lost here than in any another place." The man, he nodded, not knowing very well that say. When they said goodbye, Tonito, curious, asked, "Is that sir, was he your friend?" Raphael said, thought, "Not exactly. But now I know that the true friends are those who stay when you no longer have anything to offer." That phrase stuck floating in the air while they were walking. Back home, carrying bags of fruit and bread. It was a scene simple but full of symbolism, because before, Raphael had drivers, assistants, and bodyguards. Now he had his son, his companion, and his own hands, and he had never felt more accompanied. With his time, some offers they played again door, editorials interested parties in republishing his book, businessmen looking for his opinion in project social media, including a television channel wanted make a series inspired by his life. Raphael, them I listened. I was grateful, but I rejected almost everything. I don't want our history as a spectacle. I want it to remain so true. He only agreed to collaborate with a foundation that worked with absent parents, teaching talks and offering mentoring. Your testimony had weight because it did not come from the success, but from the fall and the reconstruction. In each talk, he showed a photo of Tonito and said, "This boy saved me life without know it." And every time he came home with the shoes dirty and the heart full, it was given realized that what he had lost in money, it there was cattle on purpose, and that I wouldn't change that for nothing in the world. Tonito, for his part, continued growing fast. It was no longer that shy boy, playing alone in the marble hallways, but a small leader in his school, always willing to help, to share, to defend what he believed was right. Raphael observed with amazement. "He is much braver than I was when I saw him." He said to Lupita. She smiled with pride, because it didn't grow with fear. One day, during a school meeting, a teacher approached them and he said, "Tonito, he talks about you all the time. He says his house is small, but it's full of love, and that you reaches." Raphael stayed in silence. He felt that all the decisions, the resignations, the nights without sleep, they were worth the pain just to listen that, because in the end, that was the greatest achievement I could to have, to raise a son who would not repeat his mistakes, but rather learn from them. At home, life went on with its ups and downs. Sometimes money was not enough, others times there were too many hugs. The dinners were simple, but full of conversation. There were board games, homework, repeat movies, and rainy afternoons with hot chocolate. Raphael, who previously couldn't stand the silence, now it I was looking for, because I knew that in that silence was the beats of his new life. One night, while Tonito was sleeping and Lupita organized the kitchen, Raphael sat down in the sofa with a notebook. He wrote a letter to his son. It wasn't meant to be read now, but not when was big. He said, "I was not the better at first, but every day since I met you, I've tried to be better. Thank you for not giving up with me." Then he kept it among his books, with the hope that someday when Tonito was no longer here, find her and know that her love will always had been there. One Saturday morning, while they swept a patio, Tonito asked Raphael, "What? What did you want to be when you were a child? The question, it took him by surprise. He remained silent for a few seconds before answering. I wanted to be someone important, someone everyone would admire. Tonito. It looked with that seriousness so his and said, I admire you, even if you are not famous now. Raphael smiled, held back the tears and thought in it much that had changed his idea of success. It was no longer headlines or gala speeches. Now it was that silent recognition of his son, that pride without cameras. At that moment, he understood that his childhood had been full of voids that he tried to fill with power, and that recently now understood what really mattered. Being present, being honest, loving unconditionally. That same day, they went to visit Don Ezekiel, who was recovering from an operation. The lawyer they received with a smile and joked, saying that already was harder than old chewing gum. During the conversation, Tonito, you gift a drawing where they appeared, the three, with superhero capes. You are my super uncle, he told her. Said Don Ezekiel, moved, hug with strength. You gave me more than I gave you, brat. Before leaving, Raphael stayed a moment alone with him. Thank you for everything, Ezekiel, for not judging me, for teaching me to fight without get dirty the hands. The man, you clapped his hands, he shoulder. You diddy hard work, boy. I just gave you a map, and look how far you arrived. That visit closed another cycle. One of those that doesn't make any noise, but leaves deep, beautiful marks. To the few days, Raphael received a letter from the Tonito school. He had been selected to represent his class in a municipal knowledge Olympiad. The child I was excited and in home it. Celebrated with an improvised dinner, rice with egg, colored gelatin and a candle in middle of the table. Raphael raised in arms as if there were won an Olympic medal. I am proud of you, champ, he said. He said, even if I don't win? He asked. Tonito. Especially if you don't win, he replied. Because the value is in try it. That phrase stuck in the air, teaching the child something he same there was took decades in understand. Greatness was not in the result, but in the delivery. And in that home small, full of effort and love, the victories were measured in hugs, not in trophies. The day from the contest, Raphael and Lupita it accompanied to the entrance of the auditorium. Tonito. He was wearing a white shirt, his hair combed neatly and a smile nervous. What if I'm wrong? She muttered. Raphael bent down, looked at the eyes and him. He said, the brave ones, they also make mistakes. What they don't do is give up. Lupita, you gave. A kiss in the forehead, and him handed over a homemade amulet, a red string bracelet that she there was tissue that same morning. The child entered the room with decisive steps. Hours later, when term, the competition, came out in a hurry toward there was no cattle, but he smiled as if he had done. I felt brave, he said, and that it was enough. That night, Raphael wrote in his notebook, today my son taught me what is the courage, because sometimes parents also learn from the children, and in that silent exchange is woven what truly unites a family. Weekends became in sacred moments for the family. There was no more board meetings, nor black tie events, nor commitments social. Only they three, going out to the park, cooking together, painting walls that had needed a second coat for months. One Saturday, while they painted the room, Tonito proposed write something in the wall before covering it with paint. Raphael and Lupita, they accepted. The child took a marker and wrote in large letters, here begin our history. Then it covered with a creamy coat, but they knew that beneath that paint lay a promise, not for the others, but for them themselves. A way of saying that old could renew itself, that the ruins also can be foundations. And every time they looked that wall, they knew that invisible also holds. One stormy night, he left the light in all the neighborhood. Raphael took out candles, Lupita prepared hot chocolate in a small gas stove, and Tonito arrangement cushions around from the sofa. They sat down, the three together, wrapped up in blankets, listening the sound of the rain hitting the ceiling. What if we play storytelling? He suggested. Tonito, Each one told something, a happy memory, a funny anecdote, a secret fear. When was his turn, Raphael spoke at once, his childhood in the one who felt alone, locked in a huge house where no one I listened. So what passed afterwards? He asked Antonito. It happened that I met you, and everything changed. In the middle of that temporary darkness, Raphael felt a different light, one that didn't come from electricity, but from the soul, because they're nights that are not forgotten. And that one, without luxuries, without noise, with no witnesses other than love, was one of them. With time, the painful memories began to turn in anecdotes. Even Tonito. He sometimes asked about things that used to cause tension. What was Mom Vanessa like? He blurted out. A day while they were having a snack, Raphael had it looked and answered with honesty. She was a woman very intelligent, but also very wounded. He did not speak ill of her. He did not hide the true. Lupita nodded silently, recognizing the gesture. Because they had agreed to raise Tonito from the true, not from the resentment. And although he passed, it hurt. Hiding it didn't help. So, between innocent questions and sincere answers, the child was putting together his own version of the history, one that did not erase her pain, but not either it used as a weapon, a version where he understood that adults commit mistakes, but also can learn from them. During one of his talks, Raphael was approached by a teenager who stayed at the end of the event. My dad abandoned me when I was born. Always I said that if a day I saw him, he would spit in face. But now, I don't know. You made me think. Raphael didn't give advice, just give him. He said, whatever you decide to do, do it without anger. Anger takes away your strength. Love, on the other hand, multiplies it. The boy left in silence, and Raphael felt that, although he couldn't change the whole world, maybe he could touch hearts individual. Lupita, knowing this, he said, you are healing others because you first let yourself be healed. And he understood that this was the key, that no one redemption is real if it is not born from within, because it is not about convincing others, besides that you changed. It's about changing even though nobody it see. One morning, Tonito returned from the school with a special task. He had to carry an object that represented your family. While Raphael and Lupita, they thought in options, the child already I was clear. He opened a drawer, took out a wooden spoon with the broken handle and said, this one. They looked without understanding. It is the spoon with the one that Mom does the cakes, and with the one Dad taught me to beat eggs. Even though it's broken, it works. And that's what we are. Raphael stayed without words. Lupita, it hugged with strength, because in that choice so simple, Tonito had defined what they were. A family that didn't need to be perfect to be complete. And while we're preparing the backpack for the day next, Raphael thought that that spoon was worth more than any medal of his parents' times. His Tonito's 8th birthday, he asked for something special. I want there to be no party, just a walk with you two. They went to an ecological park, walked among trees, saw birds, ate wrapped cakes in napkins, and they got wet the shoes crossing a stream. Tonito laughed without stopping. He ran forward, and then he took their hands again. Can I have a wish? He asked before blowing out a candle they had placed on a sweetbread. Close the eyes, he thought for a few seconds, and then breath with strength. Raphael it looked and said, what? Are you going to count? No need, he replied. Child, it is already being fulfilled. That phrase remained recorded in Raphael's heart, because that day understood that the best gifts don't cost anything money. They are built with presence, with time, with true love, and that was the greatest legacy that could leave him to his son. With each passing day, Raphael learned to let go of the past without giving up. Memory? He began to visit forgotten neighborhoods, giving not only talks, but also ideas, internships, baking workshops, reading circles, local job fairs, always accompanied by Lupita, who was gradually becoming in reference among the women of the place, and by Tonito, who was already known as the child of the former tycoon who now does cakes and gives hugs free. They were not looking for recognition. They sought to repair, although out a little bit, the damage that they once helped to build. On one occasion, a young mother approached crying. "I have no one," she said. "Lupita, you gave a hug. Rafael got a scholarship for training, and Tonito, you gave away one of his drawings." Weeks later, she got employment, and he wrote a note that said, "Thanks for making me feel part of something." Rafael saved as a treasure. One night, while they ordered printed photos in the dining room table, Tonito asked if they could do a family album. Not a digital one, but one of those old-fashioned ones with glue, labels and clippings. They spent hours cutting, writing captions, remembering moments. In one image, they appeared the three covered in flour, laughing with the stained face. Rafael wrote below, "Our first culinary disaster." In another, Tonito slept on his chest. Lupita, he put, "We're better sleep." At the end of the album, Tonito wrote with his childish handwriting, "My family, before we didn't know how to be together. Now, we don't know how to be apart." Rafael read that phrase over and over again, because in she it was all. The error, the redemption, love, the story whole. One that had not been started well, but that, against all odds, was writing with true. In a radio interview, they asked Rafael which one it had been the exact moment when everything changed. He was silent for a few seconds before answering. "When a child looked at me eyes and said to me, 'Dad,' the driver," she smiled, excited. "And that child was his son?" "Yes," he said. But not yet I knew. And that was what it did. So powerful." That phrase went viral, but for Rafael, it wasn't a literary device. It was the purest truth, because that word, saying without resentment, without expectation, was the spark that ignited his transformation. A word that broke the walls, the suits, the speeches, and the force to start over. From then on, every step he took was guided by that voice, by those eyes, for that true, incontestable, and he never stopped being grateful for it. One day, Tonito took home an invitation to a school event where the children, they had to present something that make them feel proud. Some would do choreographies, others they would present experiments, but Tonito wanted to read a text. "I wrote something about my story," he said. "Rafael and Lupita." It helped to practice. When arrived he day, the audience was full. Tonito went up on stage with a folded paper in the hand. He opened it, took a deep breath and began, "My name is Antonio, but they call me Tonito. It's been a time. Lived with my mom and didn't know my dad. One day, he showed up and everything changed. At first had fear, but now I know that the potatoes also can learn, and the mine learned to be a real one." There was applause. Lots of it, but the loudest was Rafael's, with the eyes full of tears, because those words were not only a homage, they were an absolution. After the event, several parents approached Rafael to congratulate him. One of them, with a trembling voice, he said, "I was also an absent father. I never had the courage to return. You gave me hope," Rafael said, hugged. He didn't say much. It was not necessary. He had understood that his history, although personal, no longer belonged only to him. He had become a mirror for others, in a test living that it's possible to change when love is stronger than pride. That night, already at home, while Tonito was sleeping and Lupita you preparing a cup of tea, Rafael thought in it far away they had arrived, and also in how close they had come to being lost, because sometimes the abyss is not made of kilometers, but of silences. Weeks later, Tonito. He came down with a severe flu, nothing serious, but enough to keep Rafael awake for nights. whole. He took turns with Lupita to take it. Temperature, give him medicine, make him soup. In one of those sleepless nights, Raphael fell asleep sitting in a chair next to the bed. When he woke up, he found a roll in the floor, written by Tonito before going back to sleep. Thanks for taking care of me, Dad. I don't like being sick, but I like that you are here, Raphael. He read it as if it were a prayer. He felt that this paper was more valuable than any check, than any action in the bag, because the love that is shown in the fever, in the weight, in tiredness, is the love that remains. And at that moment, he knew he was no longer afraid, lose everything again, because it essential already it had. Past he discomfort, Tonito became the one again always, a restless and creative child, and a day, without warning, he said something that left Raphael silent. When I grow up, I want to be like you. He didn't said while they played, nor on a special date, said, while they washed dishes together. Raphael looked right with hands still wet, and he didn't know what to answer, because that phrase loaded more weight than any title. It was a mirror, a responsibility and also a gift. After so many mistakes, so many silences, so many fears, your son I saw him as a model, and that it committed to continue growing, not to impress the world but to deserve that admiration that there was born without demands. Raphael smiled, dry hands to the child, and he replied, and I want to continue learning from you. In his neighborhood, the figure of the Santillán family had stopped being news. They were no longer pointed out nor commented on. They were neighbors, commons, dear ones. Lupita had a loyal clientele that recommended non-stop. Raphael collaborated with workshops for young people. And Tonito was no longer the child of the scandal, but the one who arms the football tournaments in the square. They had achieved what unthinkable, rebuilding a life far away from the noise, from the trial, and of luxury empty. In one of the meeting's community, a woman knew, he said to Raphael, your story taught me that miracles are not magical things, they are decisions. And it knew then. Every time he stayed, he listened, he asked forgiveness, who chose to love instead of running away, was doing a miracle, a small, everyday but transformative one. And the most incredible thing, it doesn't happen, there was made alone. There was made in family. In a talk for future parents, Raphael shared something he had never shared before. There was saying in public, the day they told me that child was mine, I felt fear, not for him, but for me, because I knew I couldn't keep running away, that if I stayed, I had to really change. There was silence in the room. Some were crying, others simply, they nodded. There is no manual for being a good parent, but there is a compass, love. If you don't know what do, start by staying, by being, by listening. That night, he received dozens of messages, but one he said, I don't know if I can be like you, but today I decided try it. Raphael shared with Lupita. She did it, hugged him, and he said, you see, in the end your story serves, and not just for you. And for the first time, he had truly believed. Time. Afterwards, during a deep cleaning at home, Tonito found a box that said RS in black marker. They were objects from the Raphael's past, old photos, unsent letters, medals, trophies, newspaper articles. Was this you? He asked. Raphael sat down next to him and explained everything, some with pride, others with shame. And do you like that life better or this one? He asked Tonito. Raphael smiled. That life taught me a lot, but this makes me happy. Together they put everything away again, but this time labeled differently. Before, knowing who I am, because Raphael was no longer defined by what he had, but by what he gave. And every gesture, every decision, every change, I remembered that the true wealth is in being part of something that cannot be bought. A family that is chosen every day, days. One afternoon, Raphael took Tonito to get his hair cut. While they expected your turn, the child was flipping through an old magazine. Suddenly, he pointed to a page with a huge mansion, You lived in one like that?" Raphael nodded. "And were you happy?" he asked Tonito without get up the view. Raphael took a while in responding. "I don't knew in that moment, but no." Tonito held the magazine and said with naturalness, I am happy, even though we don't have a pool." That phrase, said with such simplicity, accompanied the rest of the day. It wasn't about what they had or didn't have. It was about what they built every day, and that no marble brick could equal it, because the home truth is not made of walls, but of bonds. And Raphael at last understood the difference. In a conversation with Don Ezekiel, time later, Raphael confessed, "Sometimes I have fear of failing again, of not being up to par." The old man lawyer you put the hand in his shoulder and replied that fear is good. It means you care. He told her about his own past, of the errors that also had committed, of how nobody arrives intact to the second chance. But if you arrive with he heart open, it is worth more than any first time. That talk it strengthened, not as before with arrogance or ambition, but with humility, because now I knew I didn't need to be perfect, just consistent, that it wasn't about taking big steps, but about never stopping. And every time I doubted myself, I just had to look at Tonito and remember why. It did everything. In a school project on the parents' jobs, Tonito wrote, "My mum is a pastry chef and my dad is brave." The teacher, intrigued, asked him to explain. "He is brave because he changed, because before he didn't know how to be a dad and now he never goes away." That answer was shared on the parents' meeting and caused a deep silence. Raphael, who had assisted without expecting anything special, he was excited to hear it, because he understood that Without Look for him had become an example, not of success, but of transformation. And that kind of example, the one that is born of the error and is rebuilt with love, was the one I valued the most, had for his son. That night, while they had rice with dinner cheese and talked about things without importance, Raphael felt that, finally, everything made sense, and that the past, although continued there, it didn't hurt the same anymore. With the passage of the years, material achievements, they started arriving again. Raphael and Lupita opened a small pastry shop with help of the community. He continued to collaborate on social programs and sometimes wrote columns about parenting and personal change. But none of that, it made him lose the axis. I knew that his greatest wealth remained at home, in the hugs mourning people, in the drawings hung on the refrigerator, in the discussions about whether pizza should carry pineapple or not. Tonito. He grew up, his tastes, his clothes, his voice changed, but he didn't change. In it, essential, continued being he child that a day it called dad without asking for anything in return. And Raphael continued being he man who, since then, never stopped fighting to deserve that word. One day, while they were walking back of the school, Tonito, he asked, Do you think everyone can change?" Raphael didn't respond immediately. He looked at the sky, then at his son, and said, "Only if you want to. Changing isn't magic. It's decision, effort, and a lot of love." Tonito, it thought in silence, and then he said, "Then you changed because you loved me, didn't you?" Raphael smiled. "Changing was my way of loving you." That conversation, simple and profound, summed up the whole path traveled, because Raphael hadn't changed out of obligation, or scandal, or fear. He had changed out of love. And that kind of transformation, the one that is born from within and is sustained in every daily gesture, was the one that truly endured. While followed walking, hand in hand, Raphael knew he didn't need any more answers. The had, everything in that smaller than it had saved without know it. The pastry shop became a meeting point of the neighborhood, not only because of the products, but for what it represented: effort, unity, second chance. Raphael served customers with a smile, Lupita took care of the recipes, and Tonito, getting bigger and bigger, helped with the orders and even drew posters promotional. One day, A woman who came from another neighborhood stopped in front of the counter and said, "Are you the man from the book?" Raphael nodded, somewhat surprised. "The read in a very difficult time, and it helped me more than you can imagine." Then bought a dozen cookies and left. Raphael stared at the door close, moved, because he understood that his history, unintentionally, had begun to heal others, and that in the end, that was also part of his mission. Convert his wound in bridge, your error in path, your redemption in service. One Friday night, while they closed the Local Tonito, he put on music from his cell phone and started dancing among the chairs. Raphael, it looked, and joined without think about it. Lupita, he watched from the counter, laughing while the two of them twirled clumsily to the rhythm of a badly tuned cumbia. No one the eye saw. There was no audience, nor cameras, nor stage. Just them, laughing, dancing, being happy without explanation. At that moment, Raphael felt completely free. Not because of what he had, but because of what he no longer carried, the guilt, the pride, the empty, because I had learned that healing is not forgetting the past, but to stop living imprisoned by it, and that the real happiness is not silent because of shyness, but because of fullness. That night, while they turned off the lights and closed the bars of the premises, he knew that life was not for him. I owed him nothing. I already told him had given everything. Time later, in an interview for a documentary on fatherhood, they asked that advice would give to those who have afraid of facing his history. Raphael had thought calmly before saying, "Don't wait to be ready to love, because sometimes love is what makes you ready." He said his history without embellishment. He spoke of his mistakes, his silences, his shames, but also he talked about Tonito, about Lupita, about everything they had built from the floor. "I am not a hero," he concluded. "I'm just a man who decided stay." That sentence closed the final chapter of the documentary. And although he never got used to seeing himself in screen, when Tonito saw with he in the room and him said, "That's my dad," Raphael felt that, in that simple statement, a whole lifetime could fit in. And that, perhaps, it had all been worth it just to hear those words. With the pass of the time, Tonito began to write his own stories, short stories, some invented, others inspired by his life. One of them, titled "The Dad Who Learned to Ladrige," narrated the story of a man who did not know how to take care of your son, but what a day was transformed in bird to be able to see it from the sky and protect it always. Raphael, it read with the eyes wet and the heart full. "That me?" he asked. "Yes, but you don't need it anymore. Fly, now you are here." It was one of those phrases that would accompany me forever, because I understood that the childhood doesn't last forever, but the marks it leaves, yes. And your elderly task was not to avoid the mistakes, but be present to correct them, repair them, and continue walking together, even when the life will lead you down different paths. One Sunday, while they took frozen in a square, Tonito, he pointed to a family arguing loudly a few meters away. "Why the potatoes? Are they shouting that much?" he asked. Raphael replied with honesty, "Because sometimes they don't know another way to ask for and help." The boy thought for a moment. You don't shout anymore." Raphael smiled. "Because you taught me to talk better." It was true. He had learned to listen, to breathe before responding, to apologize without feeling that it made him weak. Lupita, who was at his side, took his hand without saying nothing, because that answer was also his. They had built a different relationship, not perfect, but based in, I respect, mutual and conscious decisions. And each of those small, everyday scenes were proof that change is not decreed. It is lived, it is practiced, it is repeated, until a day becomes in who are you. In the 8th anniversary of that day in which Tonito, it called Dad for the first time, Raphael decided write him a letter, not as a father but as a man. He told him who had been before, how lost he was, how blind that was before what was in front of him eyes. And then you speak of change, of the doubts, of the internal battles that no one ever saw. Close the letter with a phrase, "Thank you for not giving up with me when I had given up on myself, same." I don't know, it gave it immediately. He kept it in an envelope with a Tonito's name and placed in a special drawer, where also there were photos, drawings, and small memories of your new life. Because I understood that someday his son would grow and perhaps have its own shadows. And when that day arrived, I wanted him to have words that would hold. That anniversary too, it celebrated in family but not with party. They went to an animal shelter to do volunteer work, something that Tonito had suggested. "I want that day also means helping others," he said. Raphael and Lupita accepted with taste. They passed the afternoon feeding rescued dogs, cleaning spaces and sharing stories with the caregivers. Upon returning home, Tonito, he said, this was his best anniversary. Raphael, exhausted but full, he replied, because we celebrate it as it is celebrated what matters, with actions, not decorations. And that became an annual tradition, because they understood that the most powerful way to honor a change is to share it, and that the love that united it was no longer just a family bond, but a compass that guided towards something bigger, something that, with the time, they began to call it legacy. Years after, when Tonito, he was already a teenager, and found by chance his old press clipping with a scandal that had shaken his family. It is he took Raphael, looking at him without anger, only with curiosity. "This, it hurt much?" he asked. Raphael took it in his hands, noticed in silence, and then he said, "Yes, because it didn't hurt what they said, but to know that it was true, Tonito." He nodded, understanding more of what she was saying. "But you're not that one anymore, are you?" "No," he replied, his father, "but thanks to that mistake I knew in who didn't. Won't convert me." They kept the cutout in a box next to other difficult memories, not to deny them, but to remember where they came, because the identity, it is also built with what we choose leave behind, and that conversation frame a new level of trust between them, one more mature, more direct, stronger. On a rainy afternoon, while they expected it to clear up in the local, Tonito, you asked if he had ever been regretted leaving everything. Raphael stared at the wet street, thoughtful. "No, sometimes strange certain things, but I never regret it, because if I do not had done, I would have missed the most important thing, you all." Tonito. He smiled, leaning on the framework of the door. It was no longer the child from before, but his eyes followed, having the same intensity. "Me too, I would have liked to find you sooner, but you arrived when I needed you most." That confession, it disarmed. Raphael walked toward it, hugged without say a word, and felt once again that the lost time was not stronger than the time lived, and that, although he passed, always would be there, what that defined what they did with each new day. With the years, the bakery grew, but Raphael and Lupita made sure to keep his essence. They never stopped serving the public, talking with the neighbors, to prepare with their own hands the recipes that already were tradition of the neighborhood. Tonito. Now in the university, I was studying social work and collaborated in projects community. And Bim, one day while they cleaned the place after closing, he said, "I want to open a center for families like the ours, that they are starting over." Raphael said, looked with the eyes brilliant, "You have my full support." Because I knew that this desire was not accidental. It was the fruit of everything they had experienced together, of everything they had overcome. It was the proof that love had not only repaired the damage, but there was sown new roots. That night, at home, Raphael sat down to look through the family album. He flipped through page after page, remembering every milestone, every smile, every tear. When he reached the last page, he found a recent photo, the three hugging in front of the premises, with a sign that said, "Thank you for choosing us." In the reverse, Tonito, he had written, "I choose this family," over and over again. Raphael closed the album with a calm smile, because he understood that, although had started late, had arrived on time, and that his history, marked by errors, also was full of decisions brave. That night, before going to sleep, he looked into his room. Son, Tonito already was sleeping. Raphael approached, covered with the blanket, and he whispered, "Thank you for choosing me also." Then turned off the light with his serene heart and the certainty that after so much, at last had found his place in the world. If you are feeling something reading this, maybe it's time for you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel. With the pass of the time, Tonito began to receive invitations to tell your history in schools, youth fairs, and community centers. Always made it clear that his intention was not to talk about a scandal nor of a miracle, but of elections. He said firmly, "My dad didn't save me. We saved ourselves together." Raphael said, accompanied in some talks, others times it. "I watched it on video, always with pride, always in silence, because he understood that his son had taken it, better than that history, and it was multiplying, not from the pain, but from the reconstruction." And seeing him standing, confident, inspired, confirmed that all that the road, with its curves and drops, had been worth it, that the transformation had not only been hers, it had been everyone's. In one of those talks, a teenager approached Tonito and told him, he said, "Me too, I grew up without my dad, but now want to believe that still can change." He didn't respond immediately. He handed her a red bracelet, like the one his mother had given him. That was made years ago, and he said, "Sometimes potatoes they change, sometimes they don't. But you can write your own history, with or without he." That phrase, heard by Raphael from the background of the auditorium, that did contain he crying, because he understood that his son had not only been healed, but had become a beacon for others, and that your function, now it was time to accompany him from behind, without prominence, but with his same love as it had guided from the first dad, a love that does not need scenario, just truth. Did you make it this far? Prove it was worth it. The pain, comment, share, and subscribe. At home, things continued your course with naturalness. Raphael and Lupita, already with some grey hair, they kept the rhythm of the place with honey, although slower. They had hired help, young of the neighborhood. They taught their recipes and shared his experience without his selfishness. Raphael said, "None of this is just ours. Everything we have is because someone once believed in us." And that gratitude permeated every corner. The walls of the premises were full of children's drawings, motivational phrases, and photos of neighbors who already were part of the history. It was not a business. It was a home with doors open. And every customer who came in took away more than bread or cake. He took an example of how the ruins too bloom. One afternoon, while they closed, Tonito, already with an adult voice but the same clean look, and asked, "Do you regret anything, Dad?" Raphael leaned in the counter, thoughtful. "Yes, I regret not having opened the eyes before. If there were needed to lose so much to understand what is essential." Then it looked and added, "But I also know that if I hadn't fallen, I wouldn't be here." Here, Tonito nodded, as if already it knew. "Me neither. I wouldn't change anything, because this version of you is the one I need." In that exchange, brief but profound, was sealed a truth. The past cannot be redo, but it can be done resignify. And every time they chose love each other, stay, rebuild, were giving it a new meaning to what they were, and to what they still are could become. On one of his birthdays, as an adult, Tonito toasted in front of friends, neighbors, and family. He raised his glass and said, "There are those who inherit fortunes, and those who inherit stories. I inherited one. That seemed broken, but it became an E major treasure." Raphael heard from a corner of the living room, without need to say anything, that moment filled with peace. Because he understood that, although had committed many errors, your elderly success had been to stay, to have dared to change, to look at the eyes of his son and say, "I don't know how it is done, but I want try it." And that attempt, sustained day after day, had borne fruit. Not perfect, but real. And that, in a world full of appearances, was more than enough. After the toast, Tonito approached and handed over a wrapped gift on recycled paper. Raphael opened carefully and found a picture frame with an old photo. Him and Tonito sitting in the floor of the old apartment, surrounded by boxes and chaos, but smiling. Below, a phrase, "Here." That's where it all started. Raphael held in his hands for several minutes. "I thought it all started when I told you, Dad," he murmured. "No," he replied. "Tonito, it all started when you decided not to leave." And that answer, so simple and so powerful, confirmed what already I had suspected for a long time, that sometimes the moments that transform life does not arrive with applause nor lights. They arrive in silence, when someone chooses to stay, when someone chooses to love, even without knowing how. Years later, when Raphael had he completely white hair and the body somewhat slower, continued being the same person. As every morning opened the bakery with a smile. Tonito, now working in his own social project, was happening whenever I could. I would go to breakfast with the parents. "This place smells like the beginning," he said. Raphael laughed, hugged and served coffee. They didn't need many words, the connection they had built already. She talked to herself. Sometimes they came young people to the place just to meet them. "Are you the of the book?" they asked. "I am he of the mistake and the second chance," he responded, and after serving them a slice of cake, he said that there is no recipe for the happiness, but ingredients, humility, truth, time, and someone who believes in you even when you can't. One morning, while they cleaned in the shop window, Raphael found a note taped to it. It was anonymous. It said, "Thank you for showing us that families are not born perfect. They are built." He saved it in his pocket and said nothing. But that paper became in one of his most valuable objects, because he remembered that he had not only formed a family, but that he had inspired others, that his history, with all its imperfections, served as a beacon for those who still were in the middle of the storm. That was the greatest reward, knowing that your transformed pain was now a seed in fertile land, that their love, late but honest, was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt it was too late to start over. With the years, Raphael began to write less and listen more. He became into a silent mentor to young people who were seeking answers. "Don't give them," he said, "that to do. I just shared what he had lived. I don't know if it's good for you," he said, "but it was what saved me." Sometimes those words were enough, sometimes not. But I wasn't looking for approval nor immediate results. He just sowed, because he understood that each person needs his own time to bloom. And that, just like Tonito you had given his, he now could do it same for others. The healing chain continued growing, and with each new link, its history ceased to be an exception and became a possible path for many more. One afternoon, sitting in the bank in front of the premises, Raphael saw a family pass by. A tired mother, a distracted father, a child looking at the ground. He watched them in silence and wondered if anyone had ever would help them to find each other again. Then he thought, maybe they still don't know that they are on time, because that was the elderly learning of your life. It's never too late to choose love, to ask for forgiveness, to change the heading, close the eyes, breathe deep and thankful. For Tonito, for Lupita, for the chaos that collapsed and by the hands that helped to get up, and for having found in half of the collapse, which he never knew would happen to him, was missing a reason true to stay. Years after Sitta, when the place was no longer open everyday days and the walks were shorter, Raphael and Lupita, they used to sit together in the door, looking at the quiet movement of the neighborhood. Sometimes they didn't talk, other times remembered. "Do you remember when everything seemed lost?" he asked. him one afternoon. "Yes, and I also remember when you started listening to us," he replied. That phrase, so simple, it deeply moved, because he understood that the love they had built was not born from the passion neither of chance, but of the constant decision to stay, to listen, to rebuild. And that was what there was sustained when everything the rest came below. Tonito, now converted into an admired and loved young man, he continued passing by the premises, sometimes to take away bread, others just to say hello. On one of those visits, he arrived with a box. "I want them to have this," he said. It was a book he had written, inspired by his history. In the dedication he said, "To my parents, who taught me that a home is not where we are born, but where we choose stay with us." Raphael held in his hands, with tears in his eyes, the eyes, and knew that was the one true legacy. Not the pastry shop, not the talks, not the old book that he same wrote, but that son who now multiplied what has been learned, sowing love where there was once absence. Because the cycle hadn't just closed, it had transformed into something much bigger. In his last public talk, already with the lowest voice but the heart intact, Raphael stood in front of a group of young people and said, "I didn't come to tell you how to succeed. I came to tell you how you start over." He spoke of mistakes, of silences, of wasted opportunities, but also he spoke of second chances, of hugs late, of words that heal. Closed with the phrase that most defined, "I was not a good father to beginning, but I decided not to give up," and that changed everything. Upon getting off the stage, Tonito it I expected with a smile. "Ready to go home?" Raphael nodded. He walked slowly, feeling that each step closed a circle, because that was his history, that of a man who lost everything except he courage to stay, and thanks to that, won it all again. That night, at home, Raphael sat next to Lupita in the sofa, with Tonito already asleep in his ancient room, converted into study. Outside it was raining softly, and inside there was only silence. Raphael took Lupita's hand and whispered, "I think now, I finish my story," she said, looked tenderly. "No, Raphael, you only closed a chapter, but as long as you keep choosing stay, always, there will be something new to write." He smiled, leaned back the head in his shoulder, and closed the eyes with the peace of someone who, finally, had understood everything. That a full life is not measured by what is pursued, but by the obstacles that are made when everything seems lost. Ele colheu ficar. Send this story to someone who needs a second chance. And if you haven't already, you have done. Subscribe. There's plenty more to come.